Hi, I'm Kinsey, and this is my Springathon Wrap-Up. So, I think this was a fairly successful readathon. I did not get to all the books I wanted to, but I ended up reading 4 of them, including one of the longer books that I've had on my TBR for a while. So, let me just get into it. So the first book that I read satisfied the prompt to read a non-fiction nature writing book. And so I picked Underland by Robert McFarlane. And I wonder if I kind of shot myself in the foot by picking like the longest book on my TBR to go first. Because it was awesome and amazing, but it took a while to get through. And so I feel like I lost my momentum of like reading a lot of books quickly, which is kind of usually the point of a readathon. But I gave this 5 stars. It was amazing. It is a nonfiction book about different like underworld places. So whether that's like caves, man-made like excavations of different sorts for like drilling purposes, whether that's naturally occurring caves, whether that's like urban like catacombs and like tunnels like that. So kind of all sorts of like these underworld spaces. And it's very cool. Like he like usually is staying with someone locally in all these different places he visits. And he like it's a lot about the people who live around those places or who explore those places, as well as like the places themselves and describing those. It was definitely claustrophobic at times, reading about certain spaces that were so like tight for humans to be in, like made me a little bit nervous at some points, even though I knew like he had to be okay because he wrote this book. But other people mentioned obviously may or may not have been okay depending on the story. So, but this was amazing. I definitely want to pick up his other book, the one about traveling on foot. I would really like to pick that one up next, in terms of what I'm buying next. So this was great. 5 out of 5 stars. So the next book I read was actually one that I had ordered just before all of this started and ended up arriving while I was reading Underland, and that was Upstream by Mary Oliver, and these are essays that she wrote. She's mainly known to be a poet, so known for her poetry. So most of the essays are about Provincetown and her life living there, but then in the middle there's a couple about different writers. I'm specifically thinking about the one about Emerson, and there's one about Edgar Allan Poe. And I just, not that I don't care, but I kind of was expecting it to be a lot more like focused on the nature writing aspect. So I was kind of like surprised, like, I don't know, just based on how it looks, you would think it would be mostly the nature stuff. But it does say like the significance of her childhood friend Walt Whitman. You know, like it does mention that she's going to talk about like Walt Whitman, and but it's still like I don't know. It lost me in the middle. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I do want to read some of her poetry though, because I liked how a lot of it was written. I just did not connect or care about her literary heroes or thoughts, because I'm just not into that sort of thing. So 3 stars. And the next book I also had ordered and got while I was reading Underland, and this is How You Lose the Time War. So this is definitely not traditional nature writing, but as I was reading it, I'm like, this really does have like a good amount of like description of the landscape and like communication with nature and one of the agents. So if you don't know, it's about 2 agents on different sides of a time war, who start to write each other letters, and they start to fall in love. So it's a female-female romance, but in like a very strange space, weird way. One of the sides of the time war is called The Garden, I think. The Garden or Garden. And so there's a lot of like discussion. I don't know. The way it's set up is like there's a letter, but before one of them reads the letter from the other, it describes like the scenery and like describes the area that it was found in. So it does like kind of paint the picture of where this, like the letters were found. Sometimes very much in nature. One of the letters is like was placed in a tree and a tree grew around it, because there had been so much time between when one of them had left it there and the other one was finding it. So there's just like a bunch of different interesting nature bits to it. But I ended up really liking this. Definitely, I don't know, higher, I don't know, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever you want to call it. But I liked it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And technically, like, not the most traditional nature writing, but I think it counts. And it's counted for the bird prompt. I forgot to mention that Upstream counted for the water prompt. So, 4 stars. And then the last book that I read, I finished at 11:30 p.m. on the last night of this readathon, because that's just how it went. But that is The Word for Woman is Wilderness by Abby Andrews. It's funny because as I was reading all of these, like, they were bringing up very similar, like, examples of things. Like, the Underland mentioned, like, I forget what it's called, but, like, the long-term nuclear storage facility that they're building underground, and they're trying to figure out in Finland, I think, and they're trying to figure out, like, how to write that you should not come in here so that people, like, thousands of years from now will understand it. When you think about, like, language has changed so much in the past 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 that, like, yeah, it's gonna just keep changing. But anyway, so, like, she also talks about it in here. So basically, first of all, this counted for the travel prompt, the travel or destination prompt. This is about I think, 19-year-old girl who is from the UK, from the, I think, Midlands, from the central part, and she goes on this journey to basically make a documentary and explore the wilderness in the same way as, like, the so-called mountain men did, and kind of explore, like, why there aren't a lot of, I don't know, this, like, it's kind of a personal narrative about mountain men, feminism, exploration, self-perception, like, all of these things put together. Definitely had nature writing still, but I would say it was a lot more, like, I don't know, trails of thought. She's making a documentary, so she's interviewing people along the way. She's traveling, like, alone as a woman, so there's several things that come up as a part of that. So she's traveling, she goes to Iceland, then she goes to Greenland, then she goes to Canada, then she goes across Canada and goes up to Alaska and stays there for, like, 2-3 weeks or a month in a cabin. And so it's about her journey to get there, and then once she's there, it's a lot more about, like, the nature writing aspect. My cat's going wild. Point being is that I think I liked it. It's definitely different than a lot of other books I've read, and sometimes I wanted to, like, hit myself in the face because she was, like, making bad decisions, but, like, a 19-year-old girl, like, everyone makes bad decisions, and it's not, 19-year-old girls aren't excluded from making bad decisions and trusting people or whatever that should not be trusted necessarily. So, point being is that I ended up giving this 4 stars. I think it's very unique, and very interesting, and I think it kind of lost me a little bit at the end, but it really had me during, like, her travel part of it, so I liked it. It was good. So one of the books I did not get to that I really wanted to get to was The Overstory, so I did not end up reading this. It is another chunker, 500 pages. So I did not end up getting to this. I want to read this at some point this summer because I've heard such good things about it. But it didn't end up happening for me, and this was the main one that I really feel bad that I didn't get to, but I'll get to it at some point soon. So those were the 4 books that I read for the Springathon. Overall, I'm really glad that I did this readathon. I feel like I was waiting for an excuse to read Underland. I felt like it was going to be a 5-star for me, just based off of the description. But I'm glad I had a reason to do it. So yeah. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.